6 p.m. The royal villa is situated on an island near the capital. A lake surrounds the white building. A dinner party is underway. Guests chat in small groups. This is a social gathering attended by only a select few, including the crown prince. The air is filled with the scent of flowers and wine. But none of this feels right. Why am I here? I knew I would be possessed. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, her jaw clenched tight. A muffled groan escaped her throat. My credit card bill. Sarah clutched her head, her fingertips digging deep into her hair. Her body trembled with extreme anxiety. So basically this means Sarah, crushed by her heavy workload, had skipped lunch and hidden away in this empty screening room. She leaned her head back against the chair and closed her eyes. A phone screen lit up in the darkness. The sound of its vibration echoed abruptly, and her consciousness plunged into an abyss. The Imperial Department of Public Safety issued an alert. A portal has appeared on the south side of the capital. Citizens are advised to stay indoors. Beware of infection. A blue light flickered on the screen. Sarah, sitting in the back row of the theater, stared down at her phone. I'm completely exhausted. When I opened my eyes again, I was already here. A magnificent golden hall unfolded before me. A fountain churned at the top of the stairs. Crystal chandeliers refracted a dazzling light. On my way to work this morning, a friend sent me a message. My friend said, "That villainess looks exactly like you." It was a romance novel that blended all sorts of elements: zombie horror, survival, and even an R rating. I've possessed that villainess, who has the same name and face as me. Sarah slammed the tableware clattered from the vibration. What the hell does this mean? Her eyes were filled with terror, her breathing becoming erratic. She's absolute trash. Sarah clutched the pink dress at her chest. Why did this have to happen to me? Those cliche lines. Selfish, troublesome. The worst kind of villainous, dragging everyone around her down to hell. Sarah closed her eyes, her brow furrowed, and let out a heavy sigh. They're already bad-mouthing me. Sarah sat alone at the long table, her hands clasped tightly across her chest, her knuckles white from the pressure. Two noble women stood a short distance away, turning their heads to whisper. Look at her. She's probably going to have another fit. So annoying. What did I even do? This makes no sense. I'm just a victim who was randomly possessed. No, this must be a dream. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut. In 50 minutes, the alarm on my smartwatch will go off. Even if the alarm doesn't ring, the theater staff will wake me up in 3 minutes. Calm down. First, I need to assess the situation. Sarah turned her head, her sharp gaze sweeping across the room. This was a skill honed in her 3rd year of her career. When you don't understand the situation, shut up and observe first. An hour later, I'm still possessed. I barely remember the plot. She suddenly covered her face with her hands. I only skimmed through it. I didn't even read to the end. I only read the parts where the villainous Sarah appeared. I closed the page when I got to her tragic death. I should have read something like Fun French for Beginners instead. Sarah tilted her head slightly, her red pupils glancing backward. Seeing them, I realized this really is the world of the novel. Lena was surrounded by 2 people, her long pink hair flowing lightly. Her light purple eyes sparkled. Her hands were clasped before her chest, her expression shy and charming. I've never seen natural pink hair before, as expected of a fantasy world. And what about me? Sarah lowered her eyelids, her fingertips lightly touching her chin. I'm the one who bullies the female lead, right? This is why Praha hates me. Praha stood protectively in front of Lena, his gaze as cold as iron. Sarah stood her ground, her face hidden in the cool-toned shadows. Her eyes stared blankly into the void. Your Highness, tomorrow, could you? She hurried to catch up, her voice tinged with urgency. Sorry, I don't have the time. Pra didn't even turn his head. His back was resolute and cold. I haven't even said what it's about. Sarah clutched the collar of her dress, her face slightly twisted with anger. So this is our relationship. Sepphoris turned his head, his golden hair obscuring half of his eyes. His green pupils were deep and cold. He was silently watching it all. Sarah had known him since childhood, an unfortunate, ill-fated connection. During a childhood when everyone detested her, he was the only one who showed her kindness. She mistook that politeness for love. And so, she confessed, I like you. Sepphoris tilted his head slightly, his green eyes full of ridicule. Why should I like you? Sepphoris looked down at her, a cruel curve on his lips. Sorry, I hate you. Don't mistake politeness for love. After that, the plot developed in a cliché way. Sepphoris became completely cold, and she, in turn, began to hate him to the bone. The female lead, Lena. She was afraid of Sarah. The reason was obvious. Gilisi trouve ça mal. She began to bully Lena endlessly. Such a typical villainous drama. Sarah closed her eyes, her brow furrowed. If it were the usual her, she would definitely be picking a huge fight with Lena right now. But I won't. Sarah opened her eyes. Because I'm a capable woman. Interfere? She clenched her red skirt, her knuckles turning white from the force. Besides, everything is about to begin. A heavy bell tolled, echoing through the empty corridor, precisely announcing 7 o'clock. A heavy bell tolled, echoing through the empty corridor, precisely announcing 7 o'clock. It feels strangely close. A noblewoman looked around. The hall was empty and dead silent. It's certainly quieter than usual today. Maybe it's because we're on the island. The butler hasn't shown up yet. Now that you mention it, the maids aren't here either. I'll go take a look. A man reached for the cold doorknob and pushed the door open with force. A heavy dragging sound came from the end of the corridor, accompanied by a horrifying low growl. A monster opened its bloody maw and let out a piercing shriek, its pupils dilated with madness, revealing stark white bone. The man froze on the spot, his pupils contracting violently. A long sword was drawn abruptly, its blade whistling through the air. Blood splattered onto the cold iron blade, slowly sliding down the fuller. A guard gripped the hilt with both hands, holding the sword horizontally in front of him. His breathing became rapid and heavy, his pupils constricting with extreme tension as he stared intently at the shadows ahead. Please step back. Praha extended an arm to shield Lena behind him, his gaze as sharp as a blade, exuding a murderous aura. What on earth happened? Lena hid behind Praha, her face pale, her eyes filled with terror. What is that? What in the world is that thing? A young noble stammered, hiding behind a companion and pointing a trembling finger forward. A shadow writhed at the end of the hall, accompanied by a chilling, chewing sound. The stench of death spread rapidly, completely engulfing the magnificent banquet hall. Sarah's expression was blank, her red eyes revealing a bone-chilling coldness. It's begun. This work is a zombie horror survival novel and also an R-rated romance story. The survival game has now begun. Papuli crossed his arms over his chest, looking down at the head. What is this? How disgusting. He stuck out a black leather shoe and kicked the head forcefully. Is this a prop? No, it's definitely dead. Sarah rested her chin on one hand, her red eyes showing no ripple of emotion. Glad I'm not the cowardly type. She gazed at the remains. Let me think. Sarah tapped her cheek with a fingertip. That person should be. Praha's expression is one of disbelief, that he would just kick it with his foot. Papuli covered his mouth and nose, his body curling up from nausea. So disgusting. Get this thing cleaned up. Decided. From now on, I'm calling you scum. Countless withered hands struggled in the red light, their fingertips twisting and clawing, trying to tear apart this dead silence. A body was covered with a white cloth, its outline raised on the floor. Who could this be? A noblewoman frowned. Could it be an assassin sent by the Republic? Sepphoris turned his face to the side, his gaze stern. Don't jump to conclusions. The real question is why there's no one outside. Lena hid behind him, only one terrified eye visible. Sarah rested her chin on one hand, her red eyes watching the chaos. This reaction is normal. After all, they don't know those are zombies. They can't imagine that the thing they thought was dead is actually a walking corpse that can infect others. I plan to wait and see how things develop. Sepphoris clenched his fist against his jaw. Whether it's an assassin or not is unimportant. I'm more concerned about how outsiders got onto this island. Macaron frowned, looking at the noblewoman beside him. You're right. You need a permit to enter this island. That's why we left our guards and maids behind. Could something have happened at the palace? No, the palace is safe. Countless charred figures fell from the red light, their limbs twisted and broken. The zombies didn't come through a portal. They suddenly fell from the sky above the island. Macaron looked around, his expression growing more anxious. Where are the other Imperial knights and maids? That's right, they've all been infected. There are only 2 knights here. If someone really launched an attack. Sarah lowered her eyelids, her lashes trembling slightly. I can't tell them the truth. This feeling of powerlessness is frustrating. They've all been infected. Sarah, Praha reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, looking down at her face. Are you all right? She leaned into Praha's embrace, her fingers tightly gripping his red sleeve. Her breathing grew rapid, and cold sweat trickled down her cheek. Praha's dark hair fell over his forehead, his golden eyes glinting with a cold light. The collar of his white shirt was open, revealing the line of his neck. He's the one who kills Sarah in the novel. His features were so perfect, it was chilling. Sarah raised a hand to touch the red bow at her neck, her fingertips trembling slightly. Cold sweat ran down her temples. "I'm Fina. Your face is very pale." Praha looked down at her, just tired. Sarah avoided his gaze. It's best not to act alone at a time like this. Praha turned his face away, his tone flat. "He's warning me not to leave his sight." Sarah lowered her eyelids, her fingers gripping the tabletop tightly. "Yes, you're right." Praha turned around, his gaze sweeping the hall. "First, we need to assess the situation." "Jaimin, Dajilin, what's the situation outside?" The two knights bowed their heads and reported. "Your Highness, we found no maids or knights near the rooms. However, near the central staircase, we found a fallen male servant. Blood was spreading on the red carpet. A death flag has been raised." Sarah turned her face, her red pupils constricting slightly. The plot of the novel is unfolding. Following Praha's orders, the two knights carried the fallen servant from the corridor into the hall. The soles of her boots scraped dully against the floor. The servant's chest had been pierced by a sharp weapon, leaving a bloody hole where his heart was. His left arm was severed, and blood soaked his tattered uniform. A knight knelt to carefully examine the deceased's identity. What kind of weapon could have caused this wound? The servant's pale fingers suddenly twitched. His fingertips scraped across the cold floor, leaving several dark red streaks of blood. "He's still alive," one of the knights exclaimed, leaning down to press his ear to the servant's chest. The servant's eyes snapped open, his pupils bloodshot and bulging. A piercing shriek erupted from the depths of his throat. A shadow instantly enveloped the knight. The servant opened his bloody maw, revealing jagged fangs, and lunged at the knight's neck. That was the moment everyone first learned of the existence of zombies. Sarah crossed her arms, her red eyes filled with anxiety. "Even if I told them not to bring him in, they'd just dismiss me as a crazy woman. But if this continues, one of those two will definitely die." Praha wrapped a thin white cord around his fingertips, suddenly tightening it. "Bring that person here. I will guard this room." He watched his subordinate with a blank expression. "The situation is currently unknown. Do not touch him carelessly. First, confirm if he is dead, then tie him up with this rope." "Tie up a corpse?" The knight took the rope, his expression hesitant. Praha adjusted his black tie, his tone cold. "Better to be cautious than to regret it." Sarah clenched her jaw. "That kind of rope is completely useless. Don't interfere. Absolutely do not interfere." She repeatedly warned herself in her mind not to interfere. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, her breathing growing rapid. Cold sweat trickled down her cheeks. "No, wait," she finally shouted. The knight and Praha stopped simultaneously, turning to look at the flustered woman. Sarah covered her lips. "I still said it. I couldn't even use my professional skills." The two knights halted, looking down at the servant on the floor. "What right does that woman have to order us around? Does she really think she's already Praha's fiancé? Although I'm not happy about it, there's no harm in being a little cautious. Once we confirm he's really dead, stuff this handkerchief into the corpse's mouth." Sarah raised her right hand, her index finger trembling slightly. "Whatever you do, absolutely do not let it bite you. Be careful, the corpse might move." "That's ridiculous." The knight snorted, his fingertips tightening around the patterned handkerchief. "There's no need to listen to that woman's orders." The other knight remained silent, turning his head to look at Sarah. "She seems genuinely worried about us." He slowly stood up, the silver chain on his black uniform swaying gently. A hint of doubt showed in his eyes. "Confirming death is simple. Just watching them bring in a transforming corpse. It's insane. I really want to go home." Cephas reached out to block Sarah. "Sarah, it's dangerous here. Step back. Why is he suddenly acting like this? Is he monitoring me again?" Sarah pressed a fingertip to her lower lip, her gaze fixed on the corpse. "Is the handkerchief in? Maybe I should have just advised them to crush that thing's jaw." Praha looked down at his subordinate kneeling on the ground. "Jaimin, where's the handkerchief?" "Your Highness, as you can see, this thing is completely dead." Jaimin let go of the corpse's collar and stood up. "I think it would be a real shame to waste Lady Sarah's precious handkerchief on plugging a dead man's mouth." "Precious handkerchief." Sarah's eyes flew open, her breath catching. "No, wait. Get away from there. Lady Sarah, I know you're scared." But there's no need. Before Jaimin could finish, the head on the floor shot up. An inhuman shriek burst from its throat. Sharp teeth instantly pierced the back of his hand. Blood splattered. Praha's pupils contracted, and he let out a short gasp of shock. Praha strode forward and picked up the severed head with one hand. Jaimin, are you alright? It actually bit someone. Praha stared at the writhing remains in his hand and turned to Sarah. Is this what you wanted to warn us about? Thanks to you, Jaimin's life was saved. No, he wasn't. Sarah pushed Sephiroth's hand away, swallowing dryly. He was bitten near the brain. Jaimin sat slumped on the floor, half his face covered in blood, his pupils beginning to dilate. That night is already. He's already dead. He's infected. Praha's gaze turned icy. The long sword in his hand cut through the air, tracing a silver arc of light, and precisely pierced the monster's head. The monster let out a piercing shriek, dark red blood splattering everywhere. Its body convulsed violently under the blade before going completely limp on the floor. Praha sheathed his sword and knelt beside the pool of blood, his fingertips stained with filth. He examined the remains with a stern expression. A male servant covered his mouth and nose, his stomach churning violently. He let out a dry heave before collapsing to the floor, vomiting. This is impossible. A dead body moved, and people who get bitten also turn into monsters. Macaron's eyes widened in terror, his hands clutching the lace on his chest. This must be a dream. Let me wake up. If the palace is also in this state, we can't count on any rescue. Praha turned his head, his gaze sweeping past Sephiroth. We have to get out of here before we're surrounded. Wait! Lena suddenly grabbed Praha's sleeve, her pupils trembling with fear. What about the others? Maybe there are still people hiding in corners who couldn't escape. We have to save them. She clutched the black fabric tightly, her voice fragmented and trembling. Sarah watched with cold eyes, her red pupils glinting from behind her hair. How will these two male leads respond? This drama is quite interesting. In such a dangerous situation, what will you do? Will you listen to the pleas of this lovely female lead? Praha and Sephiroth stood side by side, their expressions grave, their gazes shifting between Lena and the closed door. The list of survivors is shrinking. Jaimin's name has been crossed out in blood red. The remaining 8 people, how long can they last in this disaster? Sephiroth lowered his eyelids, a hint of helplessness in his expression. Lena, I'm very sorry, but in a situation where we don't even know who the survivors are, we can't recklessly search the mansion. He turned his head, avoiding her gaze. Especially now, with 5 people who have no combat ability. We must prioritize safety. Sarah froze, her pupils dilating slightly in surprise. They didn't listen to her. This is completely different from the plot I expected. The male leads rejected the female lead's request. The scene reached a stalemate. But Praha looked down at Lena, his eyes cold. We must assume the others are already dead. This unknown situation is highly contagious, and we are not yet prepared to deal with it. He pushed Lena's hand away and adjusted his tie. Besides, in this situation, no one has come to warn us of the danger. Praha turned, his gaze sweeping over the blood-soaked mansion in the distance. I understand your concern, but Macaron stood in the back with another noblewoman, but exchanging uneasy glances. Sephiroth raised a hand to his chin, his fingertips lightly touching his lips. He let out a muffled cough, falling into deep thought with a grave expression. Sephiroth summarized the situation. First, the corpses move. We must cut off their heads to stop them. Second, being bitten by a corpse causes infection. He held up 2 fingers. His expression was stern. Third, from now on, we will use the portal to escape this island. Sephiroth pointed to the glowing archway. That is the only way out. We are currently in the innermost room on the 2nd floor. Praha nodded in response, his gaze sweeping the surroundings to confirm the escape route. The main portal is outside the villa, but according to the map, there's a sub-portal in the kitchen for transporting supplies. It's located in the center of the 1st floor, which is closer to us. Sarah crouched on the floor, her fingertip tracing the rough parchment map. I have to prepare a weapon for self-defense first. I haven't even spent last year's bonus yet. I absolutely cannot die here and become a zombie. She rummaged through some miscellaneous items and pulled out a utility knife, gripping the cold handle. Found it. It's crude, but it's better than being empty-handed. Pra knelt on one knee, approaching the crouched Sarah. His gaze fell on the small knife in her hand. He allowed a soft sigh. Excuse me, are you all right? He reached out, his fingertips hovering in midair. His eyes showed concern. Sarah looked up abruptly, her pupils contracting in surprise. What? Praha leaned closer to her face, a surprising gentleness in his eyes. You look startled, and thank you for your advice earlier. Sarah avoided his gaze, her fingers nervously fidgeting with her skirt. It's nothing. I'm just glad you didn't die. Your name? Praha asked softly, his gaze locked on the knight's face. Darjeeling, the knight replied. Darjeeling, please, you must survive. Praha took his hands, the warmth of his palms coming through the lace. You're probably the only one here who's worried about me. Sarah revealed a brilliant smile, a hint of slyness in her eyes. Of course. Praha stood a short distance away, his face ashen. Sepphoris and Lena stood side by side. The three of them silently watched this scene. An awkward chill filled the air. Sarah turned her face, glancing behind her out of the corner of her eye. They're staring at me. Did I say something wrong? He comes from family that runs a magic item shop. His status is second only to mine. Just like the magic thread Praha holds, it most likely came from his family. Macaron stroked his lower lip, his eyes sharp. This kind of hypocritical concern is truly nauseating. Besides, what's the use of Lady Sarah holding a weapon? Macaron crossed his arms. Don't swing it around and cause trouble for people. That's enough, Macaron. Lena grabbed his arm, her eyes filled with fear. It's already dangerous enough. I don't want you causing chaos around me. Your name is Macaron, right? Sarah turned her head, her eyes icy as she stared at the golden-haired young man before her. And this one next to me is Tiramisu, right? She tilted her head slightly, looking at the other flustered noblewoman. Yes, the woman cried out, covering her cheeks with her hands. I remembered wrong. Sarah withdrew her gaze, her fingertips tightening on her red skirt. A wave of irritation washed over her. Anyway, you all should grab something for self-defense, too. She raised her arm, rearranging the long hair scattered over her shoulders. Her movements carried a sense of determination. Sorry, but I'm not leisurely enough to entrust my life to others. Macaron stood stunned, a bead of cold sweat trickling from his temple. All right, Sarah bent down, grabbed the military boots on the zombie's feet with both hands, and yanked them off with a clean, decisive motion. Military boots worn by a zombie. Then she found 2 pairs of slippers from a corner of the room. Macaron let out a scream, huddling together with a noblewoman beside him. She actually touched the corpse. Sarah tossed the slippers at Lena's feet, her gaze calm. I'll wear these boots myself. These 2 pairs of slippers are for you. You can't run for your life in high heels. She stood up, holding the utility knife in one hand, her skirt swaying in the wind. On her feet were now heavy black military boots. Sarah turned her back and looked down the empty corridor. So what's next? What was that just now? The zombie's chest seemed to be glowing. A red light flashed for an instant, right at the chest of that corpse. Lena opened her palm. A faint white light danced on her fingertips. Although it's very small, she looked down at the light, a smile on her lips, her pupils reflecting the fragmented glimmer. I grant you my blessing to eliminate fatigue and restore your strength. Lena clasped her hands before her chest, a soft glow spilling from her fingertips, enveloping the man's arm. Thank you so much, Lena. Sepphoris took her hand, a gentle curve forming on his lips. This is Lena, the reason why a commoner orphan raised in a temple was accepted by high society. She closed her eyes, her hands clasped against her chin, her expression devout. Light spread outwards from her slender back. As far as I know, Sarah tilted her head, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Her power can only heal minor cuts. I'm so glad I could help. Lena opened her eyes. Her smile was pure and captivating. With just this level of power, she became the most famous priestess in the empire. The gods here are so stingy, giving such pitifully little power. Papuli swung his arm fiercely, his eyes filled with anger. Why didn't you use that power from the beginning? You made me lose a meat shield. You shouldn't have been here in the first place. Lena lowered her head. Her voice was as faint as a mosquito's buzz. I am Sotokropka. Sarah's brow furrowed, her fingertips pressing against her chest. You just called the dead knight a meat shield? What an asshole. I can think of 100 curses for him right now. Papuli stopped. Macaron shouted, his eyes showing impatience. That knight didn't die from overwork. Lena's blessing is just a blessing, not a defensive spell. Sarah let out a long breath, the gloom between her brows dissipating. Her mood instantly lightened. Macaron, you really do bite whoever you see. A mocking smile played on Sarah's lips. A hint of glee showed in her eyes. How dare you define me, you damn woman. Papuli clenched his fists, staggering forward. I don't care if he's trash or what. Sarah grabbed the back of Papuli's collar and forcibly dragged him along. Let's get going. The group walked through the second-floor corridor, their leather shoes making muffled sounds on the red carpet. Making muffled sounds. Sepphoris stopped and turned his head, Sarah's figure reflected in his pupils. Sepphoris turned, his gaze falling on Sarah. She's certainly different from usual. Praha was silent, his golden pupils constricting slightly as he stared at her profile. She's like a completely different person. No, Sepphoris shook his head gently. It's her aura that's changed. You actually helped Lena just now. Sarah looked away, her tone flat. I wasn't the one who helped her. It was Macaron. She closed her eyes, ignoring the stares from behind. She walked straight towards the end of the corridor. Don't talk to me. I'm Tayerd Kropka. Sarah turned sideways, her long black hair falling over her chest. The sound of her leather shoes on the floor came to an abrupt halt. Praha raised his index finger to his lips, signaling for silence, his stern gaze fixed ahead. HM? What? Sarah stopped in her tracks, her pupils suddenly contracting. At the end of the corridor ahead, countless pairs of scarlet eyes lit up in the darkness. Dark shadows layered one upon another, letting out chilling low growls. Lena! Someone cried out in alarm. Sarah fell heavily to the ground, her skirt spreading out, her palms bracing against the cold floor, her expression pained. Are you all right? Sepphoris hurried forward and put a hand on Lena's shoulder. Ah, thank you. Lena leaned into his embrace. Her expression was one of shock. Lena fell to a sitting position, her hands flailing helplessly in the air. Her eyes were filled with terror. Sepphoris hurried forward and put a hand on Lena's shoulder. Praha followed closely behind, his stern gaze fixed ahead. Sarah fell heavily to the ground, the skirt of her red dress in disarray, her long hair covering half her face. She looked up, a self-deprecating curve on her lips. Sarah fell heavily to the ground, the skirt of her red dress in disarray. She looked up, a self-deprecating smile on her lips. I knew it. Of course it's not me. Sarah, you got 0 votes again in this popularity poll. All the votes went to Lena. Sarah covered her mouth, her pupils trembling. 0 votes. I feel like I've seen this scene somewhere before. She stood up alone, brushing the dust from her skirt, her back ramrod straight. Sarah. Sepphoris called her name softly, a hint of hesitation in his eyes. No, I'm fine. She walked away without looking back. Sarah opened her palm. Blood trickled through her fingers. I'm injured. The broken blade lay on the ground. What a waste. Macaron covered his mouth, his eyes filled with contempt. Oof. You only won because you had a knife. Sepphoris turned his head aside, avoiding the gaze. Sarah, it's fine. I really don't care. Sarah lowered her eyelids. This kind of apology just makes me look worse. After I return to my original world, I'll have real friends. Here, I'm always alone. It's not my fault. Lena knelt on the floor, tightly gripping the hem of Sarah's clothes. I'm sorry, Miss Sarah. Please let me heal you. Enough. I'm really fine. Sarah pulled her arm back, looking down at her from a commanding height. Lena looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. Miss Sarah. Sarah stared at those trembling pupils, her eyes utterly cold. If you're really sorry, Sarah said, looking down at Lena's high heels, then take care of your own shoes first. Since you have time to heal, I might as well heal your sprained ankle first. Lena abruptly pulled her foot back, her pupils trembling as she remained silent. Sarah turned and walked towards the corridor. Anyway, let's get moving. Something doesn't feel right. Although she said they should go, they couldn't advance at all. The central staircase was piled with corpses, and the staircase on the other side was too far. Praha held his sword horizontally, cleaving through the black wings that lunged before him with swift, clean movements. Sarah scanned the corridor. It's too dangerous to stay in the hallway. Let's go rest in that room for a bit. Lena nodded in response. The group hid in a spare room on the second floor. Papuli slumped against the wall. Mascarpone collapsed onto the floor. Lena, with her back to Sarah, looked down to check her ankle. Mascarpone gently patted her chest. I hope no more knights have fallen. Seeing the servant who fell in the rear corridor, there must be more in other places. Sepphoris crossed his arms, his brow furrowed. If knights were guarding the stairs, how did that servant get near the back rooms? Praha cupped his chin, his gaze profound. He probably used the servant's passage. The passage is hidden inside the walls, allowing one to avoid being seen. To move quickly, he died before reaching his destination. Praha stared at the bloodstains on the floor, lost in thought. Sarah pressed a fingertip to her lower lip, her pupils constricting. Wait. Sarah pressed a fingertip to her lower lip, her eyes scanning the map. Since the central staircase is unusable. Should we also take that passage downstairs? Using the servant's passage should be faster. Praha tilted his head slightly, his expression serious. The monster that cut off the servant's arm is most likely in that passage. Sarah placed a hand on her forehead, annoyance showing between her brows. I didn't consider that. Then our only option is the left staircase. Lena looked down at her ankle, her tone hesitant. Yes, the problem is, it's quite far from the stairs. Is there no other way? Sarah pressed. How far is it exactly? Mascarpone leaned against the door, her gaze sweeping the corridor. From the back rooms to this room. Probably. Praha adjusted his cuffs, his tone calm. Once we get to the first floor, we'll have to double back to the central area. Lena lowered her eyelids, looking a bit distressed. We have to walk that far? She secretly shifted her foot, trying to hide her swollen ankle. Her fingertips gripped her skirt tightly. Papuli let out a scoff, his eyes showing impatience. TCH, you can't even heal yourself, yet you have the mind to give others that useless blessing. Sarah sat to the side, tending to the wound on her hand. I told her long ago. She should have used it on herself from the start. Papuli abruptly stood up and looked around. Hey, I've been thinking about something. He swung his arms forcefully, his tone becoming aggressive. Why don't we just let the men escape first? Sepphoris crossed his arms, watching him in silence. Praha also turned his head, his gaze scrutinizing. Papuli spread his hands, his expression one of entitlement. Bringing these dead weights will only slow us down. If even we can't escape, that would be the real disaster. Think rationally. I can carry one burden at most, but there are 4 of them here. Sarah turned her head, a glint of coldness in her eyes. Shut your filthy mouth. Praha stepped in front of Papuli, his eyes cold. That's enough, Papuli. If this is what you call a rational judgment, then I can only make an emotional decision. No, not all the men will go. Papuli raised his hand and pointed to the knight at the side. He has to stay here. He doesn't care if he lives or dies anyway. Sepphoris stood silently in place, his gaze sweeping past Papuli's pointing finger, his expression unchanging. Sarah shot to her feet, her leather boots making a thud as they hit the floor. You piece of trash! How dare you say something like that? She crossed her arms over her chest, her gaze as sharp as a blade. Hey, I can't pretend I didn't hear that last remark. I won't let you just brush it off. Papuli froze, his Adam's apple bobbing slightly. Huh. A mocking smile played on Sarah's lips. You say I'm a burden? If it came from the mouths of those 2 strong gentlemen, it might be somewhat convincing. She took a step forward, looking at Papuli's eyes with contempt. But I will never accept being called a burden by someone who is also a burden. Sepphoris and Praha exchanged a look, a subtle expression in their eyes. Sarah pointed to Lena, and Lena is definitely not a burden. She possesses divine power. Have you forgotten who cast a blessing on you? Without her, you couldn't even heal your own foot. Lena cowered in the corner, covering half her face with her shawl, her eyes filled with terror and unease. Papuli waved his arms in exasperation. That feeble power can't even heal her foot. Besides, no one said to abandon her. I said the one who can wield a sword should stay behind to cover our retreat. Sarah suddenly moved closer, her eyes chillingly cold. Why should it be Sepphoris? If that's the case, then why don't you stay behind? She pressed forward, her tone growing sharper. By your logic, you're a burden too. It would be much more efficient to have Sepphoris take the lead. Sarah let out a light laugh, a mocking look on her face. Oh my, it's a pity no one can carry you anyway. Papuli's facial muscles contorted as he suddenly raised his right hand. Sepphoris rushed forward and grabbed his arm tightly. Papuli. Sarah's nose twitched. She smelled the pungent odor of alcohol. Is this guy drunk? This is just speechless. She slowly closed her eyes, letting his shadow fall over her, waiting for the slap to land. A dull thud sounded. Sarah opened her eyes in confusion. Her pupils trembled. Sepphoris had Papuli by the throat with one hand, slamming him hard against the wall. Papuli. His knuckles were white from the force, his gaze as cold as ice. Apologize to her, or else. Praha looked down at him, his golden pupils glinting with coldness, his face as stern as stone. Sepphoris let out a light laugh, a fingertip on his chin. Instead of that, why don't we take him along? How about using him as a human shield? Praha looked down at the man at his feet. His gaze was frigid. Papuli. Papuli collapsed on the floor, his pupils trembling, cold sweat trickling down his temples. Sorry. Sarah crossed her arms, her expression indifferent. It's not that big of a deal. Praha let go and adjusted his tie. If it's not a problem, then let's rest a little longer before we leave. Sarah sank to the floor, watching the scene. These guys were really something else. They couldn't escape without cooperating, yet they still acted like this. She looked down, adjusting her red lace gloves, her gaze deep. But a small smile touched Sarah's lips. It felt so good to speak her mind. Not only did I help someone, I also taught a scumbag a lesson. It didn't feel bad. In that moment, the principle of non-interference she had always upheld completely crumbled. A brown-haired maid sat slumped on the floor, clutching her ankles. My feet hurt so much. Papuli squatted beside her, his brow furrowed. It's probably because the soles of your shoes are too thin. If only you had thick socks. The maid's eyes were moist. Even servant stockings would do. I feel like my legs are about to grow muscles. Sarah sat leaning against the wall, her fingertips lightly touching her neck ornament. She finally understood why they were wasting time here. It was impossible from the start to rely on these children. Sepphoris crouched down, looking at the exhausted maid. Can you still go on? The other person shook her head weakly. Sarah spread out a floor plan of the building, her fingertip tracing the complex lines. From here, we take the left staircase, then go through the dining room to the kitchen. She let out a soft sigh, a look of helplessness in her eyes. If we don't rest, then I won't have the stamina to keep going. For me, who used to squeeze on his subways and walk to work every day, this distance is nothing. But for this pampered young lady, it's probably a lifetime's worth of exercise. Do they normally just sit around drinking tea in their mansions? Sarah gently touched her cheek, a thoughtful look in her eyes. Speaking of which, I'm currently occupying Sarah's body, since the name and appearance are identical, and my limbs feel normal for now. The question is how long my stamina will last. Praha turned his head, looking at the girl beside him. Lena, how is your injured ankle? Lena put her hands together in front of her chest, a faint light emanating from her palms. She looked down, avoiding his gaze. I tried to use my power, but it seems it hasn't fully recovered yet. I'm sorry. Praha knelt on one knee, meeting her eyes. There's no need to apologize. Sepphoris watched this scene with disdain. Since Praha is taking care of Lena, I'll focus on supporting Sarah. He stood up, adjusted his cape. Sarah, give me your hand. Sarah looked down at her right hand. Droplets of blood were seeping from her fingertips. Sepphoris knelt on one knee, took her wrist, and wiped the wound with a white handkerchief. Are you hurt anywhere else? Sarah pulled her hand back, her gaze cold. No. Sepphoris moved closer to her face, his tone skeptical. Really? You took a hard fall earlier. Sarah's brow furrowed slightly, her voice hard. I said no. Mascarpone stood to the side, a mocking smile on her lips. Stop putting on an act. Wouldn't it be better to be honest? She adjusted the lace on her blue dress, her gaze contemptuous. Miss Sarah, you quite enjoy being the center of attention, don't you? It's not often you get the chance to receive so much attention from His Grace the Grand Duke. Sarah was expressionless. I haven't even said anything. Sepphoris held up his index finger, a curve on his lips. Don't fight. Look at me. This handsome Grand Duke will heal your hand. Sarah let out a light laugh. Honestly, Sepphoris took her hand, wrapping a white bandage around her fingers with meticulous movements. He tilted his head slightly, a conceited look in his eyes. Sarah, isn't my physique perfect? Sarah was expressionless. Don't you ever look in a mirror? Sepphoris froze, a blush spreading across his cheeks. I have, but for you to say it so directly, it's quite embarrassing. He covered his mouth and nose, his eyes darting away. I mean, I can't believe you'd say something like that. Sarah let out a long sigh, her gaze fixed elsewhere. Praha knelt on one knee, holding Lena's ankle and putting her blue high-heeled shoe on for her. His expression was focused. Sarah was right. I should have done this from the beginning. Sarah watched the men before her. Whether it was Sepphoris or Praha, why were they all observing her reactions? A flicker of confusion crossed her eyes. And Papuli too. Praha's gaze was deep. I don't consider anyone here a burden. All of you are my guests. If I hadn't sent the invitation, you wouldn't be in this situation. He looked around, his tone steady. To invite guests, only to see them as burdens when things get rough. That's just terrible. Who would accept a royal invitation in the future? Protecting your safety is my responsibility. Papuli squatted on the ground, clenching his jaw, silent. The break was over. Sarah stood up and walked towards the hall's exit. I'll be at the very back. I don't want to be near that bastard. Papuli stared dead ahead, his fists clenched so tight they creaked. Damn it. Mascarpone cried out in alarm. Lord Papuli. Sepphoris grabbed Papuli's shoulder, his eyes cold. Papuli, stop. What if the noise attracts the corpses? Sarah turned her head, glancing at the man kicking the wall, taking it out on the wall. Thought how pathetic. She suddenly stopped, her pupils contracting. Oh, Sarah strode forward, her hair flying. Your Highness, that servant from before. He must have left through the servants' passage, right? Praha stopped and looked at her. Where does that passage lead? It's right next to the boudoir we were in at the beginning. Sarah's breath hitched, cold sweat running down her cheek. A servant with his arm cut off. Would he really remember to close the passage door behind him? A sound came from the end of the corridor. Dull thuds echoed one after another. Papuli froze, staring at the vibrating wall. The wall was shaking violently, dust raining down. Some immense force was frantically ramming it from the inside. With a loud crash, the wooden planks shattered and countless twisted claws reached out from the darkness. Sarah whipped her head around, letting out a sharp cry. Run! She ran wildly through the chaotic crowd, holding up her red skirt, her hair a mess in the wind. Sarah stopped and looked around. Where did Praha go? He was right next to me a moment ago. She suddenly turned, her pupils constricting. What are you doing? Praha was kneeling on one knee with his back to her, his hands pressed to the ground. His silhouette looked unusually steady in the light. Sarah rushed forward, her voice trembling with fear. Are you planning to set a magic trap in this situation? Hey, are you crazy? Are you trying to get yourself killed? Praha turned his head slightly, his eyes as calm as water. Why aren't you running? Sarah stood frozen, her breathing ragged. Because, Your Highness, you didn't run. Praha gazed into her eyes, her reflection mirrored in his golden pupils. Pardon my rudeness. He suddenly reached out, wrapped an arm around Sarah's waist, and pulled her into his embrace. Sarah let out a cry of surprise. NGH. With a swift motion, Praha used both arms to lift Sarah into a princess carry. Sarah clung tightly to his shoulders, her eyes wide with alarm, her body suspended by the momentum. Praha looked down at the woman in his arms, his gaze serene. Hold on tight. He ran towards the corridor carrying Sarah, his steps steady. Her hair flew back in the wind. Behind them, a red light exploded as the magic circle on the ground vibrated violently. Flames engulfed the monsters pouring out. Praha carried Sarah through the sea of fire, his resolute figure disappearing at the end of the corridor. The monsters twisted and struggled in the blaze, letting out shrill wails before being instantly swallowed by serpents of fire. Praha rushed out of the sea of fire with Sarah. Don't worry about them, just run. The horde of monsters roared, their red pupils flashing in the bloody mist. The trap was completely destroyed. Sarah clung tightly to his neck. The position she was being carried in made it impossible for her to exert any force. No, I can't run like this. Her brow was furrowed, her eyes filled with panic. The situation is too dire. Praha rushed down the stairs with Sarah, his leather boots thudding on the wooden planks. Lena followed closely, with Mascarpone and Papuli running frantically behind. Sepphoris led the way in front, his golden curls bouncing with his movements. This way, follow me quickly. Praha carried Sarah into a room and, with a backhand motion, pulled a red wooden curtain shut, covering the entrance tightly. Praha pressed the back of Sarah's head with one hand, pushing her against his chest. Wait, shoo, be quiet. Sarah's pupils trembled. Her gaze went past his shoulder to the wooden curtain. There's no door here. The bottom of the wooden curtain shook violently. Dark shapes twisted and struggled in the gaps, making harsh scratching sounds. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut. Are you kidding me? There's really no door. This is too dangerous, and you're too close. Her face flushed red. Her breathing became difficult. Let me down, quickly. Praha released his arms and took half a step back. Sorry. Sarah lifted a corner of the red wooden curtain. Her pupils reflected the dense black figures in the corridor. Just how many monsters are there? Try to avoid them and sneak into the kitchen is almost impossible. Her gaze fell on the old floor plan. Current position, second floor gallery. Objective, pass through the dining room to reach the first floor kitchen. The distance was still great. If only there was an exit on the other side. Sepphoris pushed aside the curtain and approached, a casual air about him. Why are you all hiding in a place like this? Sarah whipped her head around and warned in a low voice, Grand Duke, you're being too loud. Sepphoris strode into the inner room, adjusting his collar. It's fine. Only those foreign princesses who believe the oracle and want to marry me would rush at me with such loud voices. Sarah's mouth twitched. So women like that really exist. Sepphoris looked around and pointed deeper into the corridor. I just checked. It seems quieter inside. Praha turned, his gaze sweeping toward the closed door. Are there any other entrances or exits? Sepphoris lowered his eyelids, cold sweat beading on his temple. There are none. Papuli's eyes flew wide, his voice distorted with terror. None? Then the only entrance is... Dull thuds came from outside the door. The horde of monsters roared behind the red wooden curtain. Sharp claws scratched at the wooden doorframe. Mascarpone sat slumped on the floor, her hands gripping her skirt tightly. We're trapped. Sarah turned her head, her red pupils glinting in the dim light. Her throat moved as she swallowed. She turned her head, her gaze falling on Mascarpone, and remembered something. Hey, Mascarpone, do you have anything useful on you? Mascarpone froze, letting out a confused sound. Huh? Sarah leaned close to her face, her eyes sharp. Doesn't your family run a magical trade company? Like self-defense items or something? Mascarpone gritted her teeth, her eyes filled with resentment. I don't have anything on me. Mascarpone shot to her feet. I left everything in the palace. Who could have predicted something like this would happen? Sarah shrugged, looking a bit awkward. Why are you getting angry at me? She lowered her eyelids, lost in memory. Oh, that's right. I remember now. No wonder she's being so prickly. A banquet hall a few years ago. Mascarpone mocked Sarah for not following the dress code, accusing her of being rude and boorish. Sarah, completely enraged, suddenly reached out and grabbed Mascarpone roughly. Sarah already had a terrible reputation. After that incident, Mascarpone was supposedly unable to show her face in public for a long time. Realizing the other woman had misunderstood her intentions, she put her hands together in an appeasing gesture. I'm sorry, I was just asking just in case. Sarah turned to Sepphoris. Can I go take a look inside? Sepphoris frowned slightly. Why? Just taking a look, Sarah replied casually. Sepphoris stepped aside to let her pass. Go ahead. Sarah walked alone into the depths of the room. Her boots made no sound on the red carpet. A magnificent crown was displayed in a cabinet. A long sword rested on a stone pedestal, glinting coldly. She walked quickly with her head down, her long hair swaying. I feel somewhat responsible. If I hadn't provoked that piece of trash, the zombies wouldn't have poured out of the servants' passage, and we wouldn't be trapped here. She stopped, her fingertips trembling slightly. I had to find a way to break through this situation. I'm the female lead, after all. I can't possibly die in a place like this, right? There must be a way. Sarah suddenly looked up, her gaze falling on a shadow on the wall. What's that? The emperor of the empire, blessed by the 12 gods, once stayed here. Ruler of the continent where the sun never sets. The glory of the royal family is eternal. Sarah stared at the ancient text on the wall, her eyes shining. She clenched her fist and swung it down. Yes, I can actually read this script. She looked around, her fingertips tracing the cold display case. This looks like a gallery for royal treasures. I'm sure I can find something useful here. She gritted her teeth, her brow furrowed. The protagonists in those zombie movies. How do they escape? Come on, let me remember. Anything will do. Sepphoris appeared silently behind her, looking down at a goblet. Do you want that? Sarah was scared out of her wits. Her body jolted, and she let out a scream. Sepphoris reached out and took the goblet, his fingertips gently caressing its surface. This villa was originally used as a birthing house, so Praha was born here and stayed for about half a year. Sepphoris closed in from behind, his arm wrapping around Sarah's shoulder, his fingertip touching the golden cup in her hand. This is from that period. Even if you take it, no one will notice. Sarah's expression stiffened, her eyes filled with suspicion. No one will notice? She stared ahead blankly. The gods are watching. More importantly, so, this is grace. I can't accept being exposed for this. Sepphoris took a step back, holding the goblet, his gaze fixed on Sarah's face. You think I would expose you? Sepphoris suddenly reached out, slamming a hand against the wall behind her, trapping her between his arms. Tell me, Sarah, what if I did do something to disadvantage you? He lowered his head slightly, a playful smile on his lips, his eyes deep. Sarah turned her face away, her breathing quickening. If there's a thief, any normal person would report them, right? Sepphoris lowered his eyelids, his tone laced with helplessness. Not a shred of trust. Huh? I came all this way to protect you, and it was all for nothing. Thank you. He raised his hand, pressing a fingertip to his lower lip, his gaze deepening. Are you still upset about what happened earlier? What happened earlier? A chaotic scene flashed through Sarah's mind. Lena collapsed on the floor, and Praha only had eyes for helping Lena up, completely ignoring her who had fallen beside them. A faint, cold curve appeared on her lips. Not all. People only feel disappointed when their expectations aren't met. Sarah tied up her long hair, her red pupils looking cold. On her feet were boots she had stripped from a corpse. Her steps were steady. Sarah whipped her head around, her brow furrowed. Absolutely not. She held her neck stiffly, afraid to mess up her hair. After all, she had just put a lot of effort into it. Sarah reached down and ripped her skirt. The sound of tearing fabric was crisp. She deftly tore off the cumbersome long skirt, revealing her legs. For ease of movement, she had even torn her gorgeous dress. Sepphoris stared ahead, a hint of confusion in his eyes. How strange. She straightened her back, her red pupils glinting through strands of her hair, her expression proud. But I never had any expectations for either of you from the start. Sarah placed her hands on her hips, her expression full of resolve. I have my pride, too. Actually, I care a great deal. She pointed forward, her tone firm. If the person I like and Sepphoris both fell into the water, I would save the person I like first. So don't worry. Sepphoris raised a hand to his lower lip, a hint of amusement in his eyes. The person you like is Praha, right? But even that Praha only reached out to Lena just now, didn't he? Sarah lowered her eyelids, her fingertips touching the red ornament on her neck. That's right. What a pain. I'll just find another man. Sepphoris froze, his eyes widening slightly, his pupils trembling in surprise. A blush appeared on his cheeks. Sarah turned her head, her gaze cold and distant. I would never fall in love with someone like you. Unrequited love isn't my style. Besides, we're not even from the same world. She tilted her head up slightly, her gaze sweeping over his tall frame. And you're too tall. Kissing would probably be difficult. Sepphoris leaned down, grabbed Sarah's collar, and pulled her towards him. Their eyes met at close range. Sepphoris threw his head back and laughed, tears welling in the corners of his eyes. Don't make me laugh. You were the one who was about to laugh first, weren't you? He leaned closer to Sarah, tapping her forehead lightly with his finger. Your expression and your words don't match at all. Whenever I say something stupid, you look exactly like my butler. Sarah's face showed disgust, her eyes cold. I really feel sorry for that butler. In that case, why don't you just go back to him? She turned and walked into the depths of the corridor, her red skirt swaying. Sepphoris stood in place, his expression suddenly turning grave. That direction is. Sarah stopped abruptly, her pupils constricting. What is that? A corpse lay behind a screen, blood splattered all over the wall. Sarah stood frozen, staring at the gruesome sight. Sarah stared at the remains on the floor, her pupils trembling. A body. Sepphoris stood behind her, his tone steady. That's why I said I'd come with you. He leaned down, his palm resting on Sarah's shoulder. Are you okay? Sarah crouched by the pool of blood, her gaze locked on the severed neck. Did Sepphoris take care of this thing? Sepphoris squatted beside her, his expression nonchalant. The big clever one cut its neck. I just watched from the side. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. I must never make an enemy of that big clever one. She reached out, her fingertip touching the corpse's cold, severed limb. Sarah, what are you doing? She ignored Sepphoris' question. A faint light appeared at her fingertip. As I thought, this one has one inside it too. A red core glinted in the shadows. Sarah held it in her palm. I don't know what this is, but I'll put it away for now. It might be useful later. Sepphoris leaned in to look, his eyes curious. Is it someone you know? Sarah stared at the remains on the ground. It's the first servant who spoke to me after I possessed this body. Miss Sarah, would you like some water? She withdrew her gaze, a fingertip touching her chin. It's nothing. More importantly, Sarah leaned close to Sepphoris and whispered in his ear to fool those zombies. What do you think if we chop up this corpse, smear it all over ourselves, and run? Sepphoris fell silent, a blush rising on his cheeks, his eyes filled with helplessness. You always come up with the craziest ideas. If we could really do that, we wouldn't have to be running for our lives. Sarah sighed, her gaze turning cold again. So that plan won't work, right? We need at least 3 corpses to have enough. If you were a little shorter, it might have a chance of succeeding. Sepphoris pushed himself up, his tone regretful. That's a real shame. After all, both Praha and I are quite sturdily built. Sarah gave a dry laugh, her mouth twitching slightly. Ha! Sepphoris looked down at the pool of blood. Sarah, aren't you afraid of corpses? Sarah covered her cheeks with her hands, her fingertips trembling slightly. Of course I'm scared, but suddenly possessing a character in a novel like this is 10,000 times more terrifying. I'm scared to death. Sepphoris turned his head, his gaze falling on her tense profile. You're really different today. Sarah lowered her hands, a hint of wariness in her eyes. In what way? A playful smile hung on Sepphoris' lips. You say you're scared, but just now you were trying to help those knights. Normally, you wouldn't even give them a second glance. Sarah avoided his gaze, her eyes cold. I don't know. Sepphoris propped his chin on one hand, his gaze roaming over Sarah's face. This really makes me curious. Sarah remained silent. The other person's figure reflected in her eyes. Sepphoris withdrew his hand, his fingertips tracing an arc in the air. Returning to the previous topic, since we're both so sturdy, your plan clearly won't work. He stood up, adjusting the gold chain on his cloak. A smile touched the corner of his lips. How about we find another way? Just the two of us. Sepphoris extended his hand to her, palm up, a hint of anticipation in his eyes. Sarah stared at the hand and let out a long sigh. She finally placed her hand in his, letting him pull her up. The two stood side by side in the empty corridor. Sarah turned her head, her peripheral vision glancing at the man behind her. Why has he been staring this way since just now? If something goes missing here, things will get very troublesome, won't they? Sepphoris walked in quickly, his voice sounding by Sarah's ear. That's a display piece. Sarah stopped, her gaze falling on the vessel in the display case. Why is this cup missing a corner? Sepphoris leaned over to look, his fingertips lightly tracing the rim of the cup that was left when His Majesty tried to reclaim it from the temple. The opposing forces at the time were very powerful. Be careful, the edge is very sharp. Sarah gazed at his side profile, lost in thought. Speaking of which, this guy is also a member of the royal family. His rank in the line of succession should be even higher than that trash. Sepphoris straightened up, a gentleness in his expression. He seemed to have seen through everything. Sarah raised her hand, her fingertips touching her lips, her eyes scrutinizing that gem inlaid statue of the god of death. It was a palm-sized statue, glinting in the faint light. The god of death was quietly watching over this secret room. Sarah scanned the surrounding displays. In the cabinet was the pure white crown of the first empress. Beside it was the scepter used by the former emperor. Sepphoris had mentioned these secret treasures before. She stopped, her gaze drawn to an object. What is this? Sarah reached out and picked up a golden skull, her fingertips touching the cold metal surface. Sepphoris came up behind her, his tone light. Ah, that's the skull of a royal who died young. It's plated with a layer of pure gold. Sarah froze on the spot, her pupils contracting sharply. What kind of joke is this? She let out a miserable shriek, flailing her hands wildly. Put it back, quickly. Sepphoris held the skull and laughed heartily, his expression mischievous. Since you're already here, why not say hello? He's my uncle, you know. Sarah screamed in terror. Absolutely not. She suddenly widened her eyes, the skull's silhouette reflected in her red pupils. Wait, maybe. Sarah stared at the skull, her breathing becoming rapid. We're thinking the same thing. Sarah cupped the golden skull in both hands, making a swallowing sound in her throat. Using this, perhaps we can escape this secret room. She held the skull high, a smile blooming on her face. Everyone, I found a good way. Sarah ran quickly towards Praha, her skirt swaying in the wind. Praha stopped, his brow furrowing slightly. What happened? Sarah held the skull out in front of him, her expression excited. Look at this. Her foot slipped, and she lost her balance, letting out a cry of alarm as her whole body pitched forward. Sarah reached out, trying to steady herself, her fingers grasping tightly at the air in front of her. Praha suddenly reached out, wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her into his embrace. Their faces were inches apart, their breaths mingling. Praha looked down at her, a look of astonishment in his eyes. Sarah froze in his arms, her mind a complete blank. Sarah's hands braced against her knees, her fingertips gripping her red skirt tightly. I'm Fina. She stood up by herself, her back looking a little stiff. Praha watched her figure, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, as if he were the villain. Sarah turned her head, forcing a smile to her lips, trying to hide her current embarrassment. Her outstretched right hand hung in midair, fingertips trembling slightly, only to find no one responding. She silently withdrew her hand, her fingertips touching her chest. She stood with her head bowed under everyone's gaze, her eyes filled with loneliness. Lena snuggled in Sepphoris' arms. Praha stood to the side. The three of them quietly watched Sarah, who had fallen to the ground. The air fell, deathly silent. Sarah lowered her eyelids, her red pupils reflecting the pattern of the floor. A weariness showed in her expression. She bore everyone's gazes alone. The moment kept replaying in Praha's mind. Sarah pressed tightly against his chest, her red pupils trembling slightly, their breaths mingling. Praha's body stiffened, his golden pupils contracting sharply. A drop of sweat slid down his cheek. He stared at the face so close to his, letting out a short, questioning sound. He clutched the collar of her red dress tightly, his body shrinking back slightly. Praha stood rooted to the spot, looking down at his own hands with a complicated expression. Sepphoris was surrounded by Lena and Mascarpone, his expression somewhat detached. Sarah hid in the distance, observing. No one saw. Thank goodness. Sepphoris turned his head, his gaze sweeping over an empty space, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He remained silent. Praha looked down at the woman in his arms, his breathing becoming ragged. Sarah was pressed against his chest. The two fell into a dead silence. Sarah suddenly pushed Praha away, her hands protectively crossed over her chest, her fingertips trembling violently. No, you've misunderstood. I absolutely didn't mean to kiss you. Praha looked down at her, his gaze cold. I know. Sarah let out a shriek, her hands covering her burning cheeks. I can't believe I inexplicably kissed his neck. She fell to the ground, yanking hard at Praha's boots, trying to pull them off. Step 1. Take off the boots from the corpse and put them on. Sarah flipped over and straddled Praha, her hands pressing down hard on his shoulders. Step 2. Argue with the scumbag and win. Sarah pressed close to the side of Praha's neck, her red pupils trembling. Step 3. Kiss a strange man's neck. She recoiled abruptly, her hands covering her burning cheeks, letting out a shriek. I can't believe it. Sarah shook her fist, her expression angry. When I was talking just now, why didn't you bend down? At my height, I can't even reach your ear. Praha lowered his eyelids, his tone flat. Sorry. He let out a sigh and bent down slightly. Please speak. I'm listening. Sarah moved closer to his ear, her expression turning serious. Those things, they seem to perceive their environment through smell and sound. So I plan to use this. She held up the golden skull in her hand, her gaze sharp. Do you have any other good ideas? Praha pressed a finger to his lower lip, lost in thought. Indeed, judging by their behavior, most of those monsters are blind. Praha looked down at the boots on the floor, his tone hesitant. Are you sure you want to do this? This skull should be your relative, right? He stared at the golden skull in Sarah's hand. If I became a skull to protect my descendants, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to rest in peace either. It's better to leave it for the descendants to handle. Sarah held the skull, a flicker of relief in her eyes. It seems he's not the rigid type who worships ancestors. Then let's do it. She clenched her fist, her expression becoming energized. Once we're safe, we'll hold a grand memorial service to ask for forgiveness. Praha's brow furrowed slightly. Memorial service. Sarah closed her eyes, an image of Praha appearing in her mind. He was wearing a pink apron, skillfully chopping meat in the kitchen. The firm lines of his arms were impossible to look away from. The ancestors would surely be very happy to see Praha cooking with his own hands. Sarah hid behind a red curtain, her fingertips parting a small gap. I found the spot. I'm going to throw it. Praha stood behind her, his gaze focused. Then I'll leave it to you. Sarah took a deep breath, her 5 fingers gripping the golden skull. He looks like he should be good at throwing. Then let's leave it to the descendant. Praha lifted the golden skull with one hand, his arm muscles tensing. He suddenly drew back, gathering strength. Sarah pressed her hands together against her lower lip, closing her eyes tightly. Ancestor, please guide our way. The golden skull cut through the air and smashed heavily against a distant wooden door. Wood splinters flew, and it made a dull, loud thud. Attracted by the sound, swarms of monsters shrieked and rushed towards the door. Black smoke filled the corridor. They really all gathered over there, as expected of our ancestor. Sarah hid in Praha's arms, a hint of cunning in her red pupils. Since the ancestor contributed so much, we must prepare a lavish meal for the memorial service. Praha looked down at her, a flicker of smile in his eyes. All right, I'll do my best. Sepphoris stood not far away, his gaze fixed on their overlapping figures. His expression turned grim. He remained silent. He strode forward, placing a hand on Praha's shoulder, a false curve on his lips. Well then, shall we be on our way? Sepphoris walked down the steps, scanning the surroundings. It looks safe here. He stopped at the kitchen entrance. The stove was a mess, as if they were attacked while cooking. He leaned down to examine the man lying on the floor. This is the head chef. There are no bite marks on his body. It seems he committed suicide. Sarah's eyes were cold. To be safe, shouldn't we cut off his head? Praha crouched beside the body, his fingertips touching the cold floor. Yes, for safety's sake, let's do that. Mascarpone collapsed on the floor, her skirt in disarray. I can't walk another step. Sepphoris turned his head, his expression helpless. I know it's hard, but once we reach the teleportation circle, we can return to the palace. You can rest then. Mascarpone looked up, her eyes filled with terror. Who knows what the palace is like now? If it has fallen too, I'll be dead the moment I go back. Please, just let me rest for a bit. Sarah stood with her hands on her hips, cold sweat on her forehead. No, we'll talk after we confirm the palace is safe. You already rested in the spare room and the gallery. Your stamina is practically in the negatives. Praha, who was searching through the shelves, paused. Please rest until we find it. Strange. It's not here. He looked at the empty countertop, his brow furrowed. It should be around here. Sarah moved closer to him, looking thoughtful. I see. Something like this certainly wouldn't be placed in an obvious spot. That makes sense. He lowered his eyelids, his expression grave. It seems we can't leave right away. Lena was curled up in a corner, her hands gripping her skirt tightly. Where did everyone who was originally here go? Mascarpone's brow was furrowed. There should have been many servants here. A maid looked around. Did they escape through the teleportation gate first? Mascarpone shook her head. If they had escaped, the reinforcements should have arrived by now. Lena's pupils trembled. Could it be they all turned into monsters? Praha stared at the closed window. Did they go over there because they heard the sound of the window breaking earlier? He reached out and pushed the doorknob. This door is locked from the inside. If they had escaped, the door should have been open. Lena buried her head in her knees. Then what on earth happened? The maid clutched her stomach. I just want to eat something right now. All right. Sepphoris turned his head, his gaze falling on Lena. He walked over to Lena with a medicine bottle. I found some medicine for sprains. Let me see your ankle. Lena abruptly pulled back, her expression flustered. Your Grace, I can do it myself. Sepphoris knelt on one knee and took hold of her ankle. It'll be faster if I do it. He looked up, a gentleness in his expression. Please, let me at least do this much for you. Don't make me feel too bad, all right? Lena let out a soft whimper. Sepphoris dipped his fingertip in the ointment and applied it to her fair ankle. Sarah stood to the side, watching. To think there's medicine in the kitchen. What a surprise. Mascarpone was sprawled on the floor, a mocking smile on her lips. If you're that jealous, why don't you just say so? Sarah turned her head, a look of confusion in her eyes. What? Is she talking to me? Mascarpone propped herself up. You sprained your ankle when you fell earlier, didn't you? Sarah's heart tightened, so she saw. Mascarpone let out a cold laugh. It's useless to pretend to be well-behaved, Lady Sarah. Don't think someone will come help you just because you stay quiet. She lay on her side amidst a flower-like illusion, her gaze sharp and arrogant. Everyone knows you're a lunatic who craves attention. Why not act like your usual self? Go on, tell everyone. You sprained it too. Sepphoris paused his actions and looked up at Sarah. Sarah, did you sprain your ankle too? Sarah avoided his gaze and waved her hand. No, I was just looking to see what kind of medicine that was. I'm fine. I can walk without any problem. She turned away, running her fingers through her hair. Even if I stay quiet, I still get ridiculed. As long as I find the teleportation gate, I can escape this place for good. Whether it was at the office or in the novel, things always develop in unexpected directions. Sarah stared at the hanging cuts of meat. If I eat food that's been splattered with monster blood and flesh, will I get infected? She averted her gaze. I should find something that looks safe. I really should have finished reading that novel. Sarah took a glass jar from the shelf, her fingers touching the cold glass. There are almonds here. Mascarpone was collapsed on the floor, while Lena and a maid cowered behind her, their eyes fixed on the jar in Sarah's hand. Sarah held up the almond jar, the corners of her lips turning up slightly. As the saying goes, you have to eat your fill to have the strength to fight. Isn't that right? Sarah slumped to the floor. I really want to lie down and rest. She suddenly remembered something, her gaze focusing on her fingers. What exactly is this red gem? There isn't a single drop of blood on it. Sarah stared at the gem's shimmering light. The chests of those monsters on the second floor. They seem to be glowing too. It's less like I picked it up and more like it attached itself to me. Just like an item drop from defeating a monster in a game. Her fingertips trembled slightly. Could this be a hint for the transmigrator? If I try talking to it, will it answer? Praha stood behind her, his tone flat. I'm here. Sarah flinched and hunched her shoulders, her pupils dilating abruptly. What did you get here? Praha lowered his eyelids. You startled me just now. I didn't think you'd be worried about me. Sarah's eyes widened, her fingertips frozen in midair. The scene from earlier flashed through her mind of herself yelling at Praha. Hey, are you trying to get yourself killed? Sarah turned her head away, somewhat embarrassed. Sorry, I was too panicked at the time. Praha's gaze shifted down, staring at her leg. Does your ankle hurt? Sarah sat on the edge of a wooden barrel, supporting herself with her hands. Things were too chaotic up there. I wasn't thinking straight. Please forgive me. Praha eston sofend. There's no need to be so formal. Sarah waved her hand and smiled. I'm fine. These boots are very sturdy. Lena is more seriously injured. You should go worry about the woman you like. Praha remained silent, his golden eyes gazing at her. Sarah turned her face to the side, a faint smile on her lips. Let me be clear. I'm not angry anymore. I said I'm fine because I really am fine. No need to worry. Praha lowered his eyelids. That's not what I meant. I heard from Sepphoris that you took something from the corpse. Sarah's smile froze. Cold sweat trickled down her cheek. He actually saw it clearly, though I wasn't planning on hiding it anyway. She opened her palm, the red gem glinting between her fingers. Have you ever seen something like this? Praha stared at her palm, a look of confusion in his eyes. No. Is that something important? Sarah's pupils trembled slightly, so others can't see it. In other words, it only becomes visible when it's in my hands. She closed her 5 fingers, deciding to avoid the topic. Because it's pretty. I just picked it up without much thought, no other reason. Praha nodded slightly. I see. Then, he suddenly bent down, his fingertips touching Sarah's ankle. Sarah's eyes widened in confusion. Praha was holding a red apple in his hand, his gaze fixed straight ahead. I apologize for the inconvenience our guests have suffered. Once we return safely to the palace, please allow us to formally host you all. Sarah held a similar red fruit in her arms, a hint of confusion in her eyes as she watched Praha's back. A man in a uniform came running, his footsteps echoing in the corridor. Lady Sarah, are you uninjured? Are you unwell anywhere? Sarah turned to look at the man who had stopped in front of her. I'm Fine. Did you come all this way because you were worried? Darjeeling appeared after I ran into Praha. Do they think I was hiding because I was throwing tantrum? Darjeeling's eyes were slightly red, his expression anxious. Of course I was worried. I promised I would protect you. Sarah looked away, her tone calm. Don't worry about me. You have many other things you should be doing. Darjeeling pressed a hand to the long sword at his waist. During breaks in combat, he acts as an attendant, both being vigilant of the surroundings and serving the nobles. Currently, only Praha and Sepphoris have any fighting strength. He's under immense pressure. Sarah looked at Darjeeling's stiff back. He might be the most pitiful one of all. Darjeeling walked up to Sarah. He looked down at her body. It's not just your foot. Your hand is injured too. Sarah sat on the ground, her tone flat. This level of injury is nothing. Darjeeling's brow furrowed slightly, his eyes showing worry. But isn't this the first time you've received such an injury? Sarah closed her eyes, a bitter smile on her lips. There's a first time for everything. Darjeeling gazed at her, his expression becoming serious. Although it may be presumptuous, I'm truly grateful that you are with us, Lady Sarah. Sarah opened her eyes, her expression puzzled. Huh? Why? Sepphoris crossed his arms. You ask why? You've shown unexpected talent today. To be frank, if it weren't for you, we might not have made it this far. Sarah stared at his brilliant smile. When did this guy sneak in again? Have he changed? Or was he always this type of person? She looked away, a little awkwardly. I think you're overestimating me. Even without me, you all would have definitely found a way to escape. Sepphoris's expression stiffened, his voice low. Then why didn't you tell me your ankle was injured? He raised a hand to cover his face, annoyance showing between his fingers. I feel like I've been nothing but trouble for you today. Sarah stood up and straightened her red skirt. That sentence applies now as well. I've been saying I'm fine the whole time. She reached out and pressed a finger against Sepphoris's chest, her gaze sharp. Try to trust me a little more. Sepphoris pressed a hand to his chest, feeling his heart pound through his white shirt, his expression somewhat dazed. Sarah turned and walked towards the back of the kitchen, her long black hair swinging with the movement. Her back was resolute. Sepphoris stood frozen. Sarah, where are you going? Sarah turned her head, her eyes cold. To pick a fight. She stopped, her black boots planting on the stone floor. She walked towards Lena in the corner. Sarah held out the food in her hand, her tone forceful. Eat it now. Lena cowered in the shadows, holding a piece of bread in both hands, her eyes terrified. Sarah pointed at the food in her hands. You're the only one who hasn't eaten yet. Don't waste it. Lena's eyes filled with tears, her body trembling slightly. Aren't you eating? Sarah looked down at her, overwhelmed by her presence. Lena shrank back and responded in a small voice. Oh, okay. Sarah stared at Lena. Chew it well. Lena took large bites of the bread, swallowing, making dull swallowing sounds. Sarah looked around. Is there any other food? She picked up 2 pieces of bread and wrapped them carefully in a cloth. I'll take these just in case. This should last us a while. She looked down at her dress. The pockets are too small. It can't be helped. After all, this is an emergency. Sarah stuffed 2 round potatoes down the front of her dress, the motion rough. Mascarpone hid in the distance, her eyes filled with disgust. So crude. A maid rubbed her stomach. I feel alive again after eating. Mascarpone stood up and straightened her dark blue dress. I agree. Then let's head to the teleportation gate. Praha's expression was grave. There's something I must tell you all. Mascarpone and the maid stopped, looking at him uneasily. Praha spread his hands, his eyes grim. I can't find the teleportation gate. Sarah's eyes flew wide, her pupils trembling in shock. What? Lena's face instantly turned deathly pale, her hands clenched tightly at her chest. Sephirus froze on the spot, his expression rigid. Praha stood opposite everyone, his face as dark as iron. The teleportation gate is gone. We're trapped. Praha lowered his hands. There's no door leading to the gate here either. I tried knocking on the walls, thinking it might be hidden behind them, but I didn't find any hollow spots. Populi gritted his teeth, making a grinding sound. I knew it would come to this. That's why I said we should have left these people behind. He shook his fist, veins popping on his forehead as he roared at Praha. Praha? A maid covered her face, tears streaming through her fingers. How could this happen? What are we supposed to do now? Mascarpone pressed a hand to her forehead, her eyes filled with disbelief. This must be a lie. Sarah tilted her head, her eyes filled with confusion. Is this really something worth crying over? I think the teleportation gate is just hidden. Let's look for it carefully. Mascarpone covered her face, tears streaming through her fingers, her expression crumbling. When it comes to teleportation gates, there's someone who knows more than Praha. Sarah stared at her, her eyes cold. The gods don't help those who don't help themselves. Save your tears for after we've escaped. Mascarpone looked up abruptly, waving her hands in front of her chest. If we could escape, I wouldn't be crying. Sarah tilted her head. Oh, is that so? Mascarpone lowered her hands and took a deep breath, trying to calm her ragged breathing. Sarah stared into her eyes. Now that you're calm, help us. You're the one who holds the key. It was your family that installed the teleportation gate, wasn't it? Sarah raised a hand to her forehead, her long hair falling with the movement. Were teleportation gates usually installed? Mascarpone bit her fingertip, her eyes thoughtful. Let me think. A teleportation gate requires a considerable amount of space. Because the magic it releases can cause explosions, it's usually installed outdoors. She pointed to the surrounding walls. If it's installed indoors, the walls must be reinforced and thickened to withstand a magical impact. Sarah turned and knocked on a wall, producing a crisp sound. I see. These walls don't look very thick. Sarah looked down at the ointment in her hand. There's sprain medicine in the kitchen. Strange. I could understand if it were burn ointment. Did someone fall from a ladder? But there are no high shelves here that would require a ladder. Mascarpone's eyes flew wide. In a single-story building, the teleportation gate is sometimes installed underground. To detect the vibrations from below, some small items are scattered on top. Items. Praha quickly walked to an empty spot, bending down. Let's move this. He made a fist and knocked hard on the floor with his knuckles, producing a hollow echo. There's space underneath. Sarah knelt beside Praha, staring at that section of the floor. Just as I expected, Mascarpone moved closer to observe. This should be the type where the handles only appear after authentication. Since it didn't respond to Praha, the registered authenticator must be the head chef. Praha looked up, a hint of doubt in his eyes. What's the authentication method? Sephirus raised a hand to his forehead, his eyes thoughtful. Authentication requires a hand or a face. Once it passes, it will respond to human intent. He lowered his hand, his gaze sweeping over the group. As long as you shout, open, or move your hand, anyone can give the command. Populi strode towards the corner. Then this is simple. He crouched down and lifted a bloody head from the shadows, a twisted smile on his lips. We can solve this with the head chef's face. Sephirus whipped his head around, reaching out to stop him. Wait a minute. Let's discuss this first. Populi, he hissed. Populi turned a deaf ear, slamming the head hard against the floor. We're about to lose our lives. What is there to discuss? The ground gave a dull tremor. Two metal handles broke through the floor and rose slowly. Lena stared at the handles, her pupils trembling. There are red marks on the handles. Were they painted on to make them easier to see? Sarah stared at the red color, her eyes cold. Something's wrong. It's impossible. She looked at the head chef's body in the distance. If there was a teleportation gate, why didn't the head chef escape? Why did he choose to kill himself here instead? Sarah stared at the sugar scattered all over the floor. Why scatter sugar before dying? Was it to hide the entrance? As if he was afraid the entrance would be discovered. Sarah's pupils contracted sharply. Could it be that what's hidden inside is? Papuli violently shoved aside the person next to him, his expression manic. Get out of the way. I'm going first. He bent down, grabbed the metal handles, and let out a roar. Open. Sarah stretched out her arm to block him, her expression terrified. Wait a minute. You absolutely cannot open it. Praha rushed forward, grabbing Papuli's shoulder and trying to pull him away. Papuli let out a muffled grunt. A crack opened between the metal handles. A red glow shone through the pitch-black void, as if countless pairs of eyes were peeking out. Papuli froze on the spot. Sephirus's face was deathly pale. Close it quickly. Sephirus stumbled back, his pupils shrinking in fear. No. Countless sharp claws stretched out from the pitch-black crack. Dark red monsters shrieked as they crawled out, instantly overwhelming Papuli. It's too late. Mascarpone turned away, her hands clamped tightly over her ears. It's useless. Once it's fully opened, it can't be closed. Praha drew his sword, the blade cutting through the air to precisely pierce a monster's chest. He sidestepped to avoid the splattering black blood and abruptly pulled taut a golden thread in his hands. The threads crisscrossed between his fingers, emitting a taut hum. Praha gritted his teeth, a look of resolve in his eyes. Everyone spread out. He exerted force again, and the threads severed the monster's limbs. Blood splattered onto the side of his face. Help me. Papuli's wails were swallowed by the darkness. Sephirus reached forward, his expression horrified. Papuli, draw your sword. Papuli had collapsed to the ground, his hands clawing uselessly at the monster's arms. I can't. Save me. Someone, save me. The monster let out a roar, dragging Papuli towards the abyss. The scream stopped abruptly. Sarah raised the heavy tray high, her eyes bloodshot and filled with determination. She slammed it down violently. Sephirus collapsed to the ground, staring in the direction where Papuli had disappeared, his body trembling uncontrollably. Mascarpone and Lena cowered in a corner, their faces pale, watching the hourglass before them. Sarah stared at the crack, her eyes cold. This isn't a portal at all. It's an entrance to hell. Sarah looked down at her right hand. Her palm was cut by a sharp blade, blood dripping through her fingers. Calm down. It's no big deal. She clenched her fist fiercely, letting the pain explode in her palm to suppress the trembling inside her. Beads of blood fell continuously to the ground. Sarah strode forward, grabbed Papuli by the collar, and hauled him up from the ground. Don't play tricks on me. My patience has its limits. Her eyes were icy, staring intently at his terrified face. If you want to die, go die by yourself. Praha walked in slowly, his gaze stern. He stopped beside the two of them. His voice was low. This is the second time. You put others in danger. Praha's eyes were icy as he watched the limb man. If there's a third time, Praha turned his head to look at the woman beside him. What on earth did she do to scare Papuli like this? He softened his voice, a hint of worry between his brows. Are you all right? Sarah. Praha lowered his gaze, looking at Sarah's injured palm. The wound has opened up. Let's treat it first. He reached out and took her wrist, his movement leaving no room for refusal. Sarah flinched slightly, her pupils reflecting the man's side profile. Lena clasped her hands before her chest, her eyes filled with determination. Let me do it this time. If I can use my power, I should heal your ankle first. Sarah turned her head to look at the trash kitchen. This place is unusable now. It seems we can only go to the garden's teleportation circle. She withdrew her gaze and found Praha still looking at her. Your Highness. Praha didn't let go. His fingertips touched the edge of her red dress. Part of my intrusion. His long fingers reached into her collar, gently hooking the fabric inside. Sarah held her breath. Is this really happening? Praha's fingertips were wrapped in a golden thread, which he pressed against Sarah's chest. Is it all right to use this for bandaging? This was originally a weapon, wasn't it? He lowered his gaze, adjusting the thread with a focused expression. This thread can adjust its sharpness based on the force applied. I see. Praha wrapped the thread around her wound, his movements gentle. As long as it's secured tightly enough, the wound will heal faster. There, it's done. Sarah looked down at her bandaged palm and responded softly, "Thank you." She suddenly remembered something, a glint of gold flashing in her eyes. "Right? Since we're leaving, let's take the items from here with us." Sarah squatted by the fireplace, staring at the cold bricks. "If we were to start a fire here, what method would you use?" She turned her head, her eyes showing cool calculation. Since smashing their heads can kill them, fire should also work. Praha held a heavy ceramic pot, his eyes filled with doubt. Use fire against them? Sarah stared at the dense swarm of monsters. There are too many monsters. We can't chop off their heads one by one. We can use Molotov cocktails. The materials are all here. Sephirus stroked his chin, looking puzzled. Who's going to make something like that? Sarah raised her hand, the one wrapped in thread. I will. Sephirus stared at the woman before him. Do you know how to make them? Sarah pushed aside her messy hair, a confident smile on her lips. For an ambitious, noble lady, this is basic knowledge. Although I learned it from the movies. Sephirus chuckled softly, a hint of admiration in his eyes. You really are a special person. Sephirus nodded slightly. That does make sense. Praha looked around, a hint of confusion in his eyes. I thought the kitchen fire would never go out. Are there any tools to start a fire here? Sarah's lips twitched. Don't tell me you were planning to prepare the offerings without knowing how to start a fire? Praha remained silent, the tips of his ears turning a shade of crimson. He averted his gaze. It was the first time in his life he had ever set foot in a kitchen. Sephirus let out a soft laugh, watching Praha's embarrassed state. Ha! Praha's ears turned red. How cute. Sarah suddenly turned to stare at Sephirus, her eyes filled with suspicion. You don't know how to start a fire either, do you? Such a family that doesn't partake in the trifles of mortal life. Sephirus's smile froze. He awkwardly looked away. All right, I admit I don't know either. Mascarpone stepped forward, a look of arrogance in his eyes. I'll teach you. He took out a long spear from his back, the tip of which gleamed with light. With this magic spear, you just need to aim and swing it to create fire. Sarah took the spear, feeling its heavy weight. Like this, she swung her arm fiercely. The spear traced an arc in the air. A burst of fiery light erupted, illuminating the dim room. Sarah swung the spear, and flames shot up, a wave of heat washing over her. Mascarpone's expression was serious. This thing consumes a lot of stamina at once. Only a few people can handle it, and it needs to be charged. Sarah looked at the spear. Charging? Does it recover over time? Mascarpone nodded. It takes 30 minutes to recover after one use. A full charge allows for 10 consecutive uses. Sarah leaned in to observe it. How do you know how many uses are left? Mascarpone put his hands on his hips. I don't know. You'll have to count as you use it. Sarah withdrew her gaze and looked at the night outside the window. At least it's better than flint, even though we can't make Molotov cocktails. She held the spear tightly and offered it forward. Praha reached out and took it with a steady motion. Sarah looked into his eyes. I'm leaving it with you. You seem more skilled than Sephirus. I feel like that guy would break it. Praha gripped the spear, his eyes firm. I'll take good care of it. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief. Actually, this thing isn't mine. And to be honest, it's a bit heavy. Praha walked towards the door and turned his head to look at Sarah. Your Highness, it seems we can go out now. He gripped the spear in his hand and was the first to step into the hallway. The main teleportation circle is at the end of the garden. But between the villa and the garden, there's a hunter's cabin. Sarah stared at the map, her fingertip tracing the edge of the parchment. The problem is we don't know how many corpses are there. How is it written in the novel again? I can't remember at all. Lena leaned against the wall, her face pale. If we get surrounded or panic, it would be too dangerous. Mascarpone shrank his neck, just imagining the scene of being thrown in there. It feels like it's all over. Sarah rested her chin on her hand, her eyes filled with confusion. What does the garden actually look like? Praha looked at Sephirus beside him, his gaze calm again. In any case, let's take shelter in the hunter's cabin first. Sephirus and I will scout the garden. Sephirus adjusted his cloak, a relaxed smile on his lips. No problem. Sarah stared into the void, a bead of cold sweat trickling down her temple. I thought the kitchen was the end of it, but we're back to square one. What a pain. She turned around, her back showing her resolve. It's come to this. We can only keep moving forward. Praha held out a pair of black boots and looked at Lena. Miss Lena, please change into these. They were taken off a corpse, so they might make you uncomfortable. Lena took the boots and hugged them tightly, a gentle smile blooming on her face. It's all right. Miss Sarah is wearing them too. Thank you. Darjeeling. Sarah watched this scene her tense shoulders relaxing slightly. Thankfully, no one has broken down. The heavy wooden door opened slowly with a harsh scraping sound. Outside, the ground was overgrown with weeds. Though the night was soft, the wind that blew across their cheeks carried a chill. The group stepped into the courtyard, their footsteps echoing on the stone ground. The air was thick with a cruel atmosphere. A maid suddenly froze, her hands gripping Sarah's red dress tightly, her pupils trembling violently with fear. That sound. Sarah raised her index finger to her lips, signaling the maid to be quiet. Her pupils contracted slightly in the moonlight. A low growl came from the distance, echoing in the empty corridor, making one's hair stand on end. Praha stopped, listening intently, his expression growing more solemn. The sound is coming from over there. Sepphoris placed his hand on his sword hilt, shielding the others. He stared intently at the shadows ahead. Sepphoris turned his head to look at his companion, his expression grave. "So what's the plan now?" Sarah clenched her fists, her knuckles turning white from the force. "There are 3 of them here, so it's 1 for each of us." A smile played on Sepphoris's lips, his gaze falling on her clenched fists. "The way you clench your fists. That you look like a true warrior." Sarah's eyes were icy. "Stop talking nonsense. Are we going to fight too?" Sepphoris tilted his head slightly, a smile on his lips. "No need." Praha suddenly pushed off the ground, his figure becoming a blur. He gripped his long sword with both hands, the blade reflecting a cold light as it drew an arc. A monster's head flew into the air in an instant, the white light in its eye sockets extinguishing. Praha is a war hero for a reason. Praha sheathed his sword with a clean, crisp motion. He turned sideways, his gaze sweeping behind him. Sepphoris stared ahead. "Looks like I was worried for nothing." Sarah stood to the side, a look of indifference on her face. "Looks like I was indeed worried for nothing." Sepphoris pinched a dagger between his fingers and flicked it backward. "By the way, I'm a war hero too. You should know that, right?" The dagger pierced through a monster's head. The white light exploded between its brows. The charred torso stood stiffly for a moment before collapsing to the ground. Sepphoris propped up his chin with one hand, the corners of his eyes lifting slightly, his expression full of smugness. Sarah shot him a sideways glance, her eyes filled with disdain. That self-satisfied expression. "You've lost more points with me." Sepphoris reined in his smile and strode forward. "Let's go. Who knows how many more monsters are hiding in the garden." Praha stopped and turned to look at the group behind him. "Please, everyone, stay here with Darjeeling. Sepphoris and I will go out and check the situation." Sarah took a step forward, her fingers tightly gripping her skirt. "If something happens to you two, we're all finished. Please take Darjeeling with you." Praha lowered his gaze, looking at the anxious woman before him. "Are you all right?" Sarah shook her head fiercely. "Of course not. So please come back safely right away. I'll be praying for you." Sepphoris stood behind Praha, his shoulders shaking as he let out a low laugh. A flash of disgust crossed Sarah's eyes. "That guy's laughter is way over the top." Praha pulled a golden thread from his sleeve. His fingers wrapped it nimbly, gathering it into a ball of light, and held it out to Sarah. "Take this." Sarah stood frozen, her pupils trembling slightly. "Why?" Praha's expression was serious. "For self-defense. The people staying here have no weapons." Sarah's mouth twitched, a bead of sweat appearing on her temple. "Why me? Does he think I'm the kind of person who can take out zombies without hesitation?" Praha wrapped the golden thread around her fingers. "This thread responds to the will of its holder. If you desire sharpness, it will become incredibly sharp. Normally, it's just an ordinary string." Sarah looked down at the faint glow between her fingers. Praha leaned close to her wrist, guiding her on how to apply force. "When you want to cut something, do it like this." Sarah looked up, a hint of hesitation in her eyes. "Shall I try it?" Sarah looked around, her gaze locking onto a wooden chair in the corner. "What should I test it on? Can I cut off that chair's leg?" Sarah squatted down, her skirt spreading out on the wooden floor. She held her breath and suddenly applied force with her fingertips. "Extend it, like this." A golden light instantly sliced through the air. The chair leg was severed cleanly at the base, the cut as smooth as a mirror. Sarah shot to her feet, a flowing golden light wrapped around her fingertips. "I did it." Praha watched her side profile, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Well done." Sarah's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Maybe I have a talent for this. I could even consider a career change." Praha shook his head helplessly. "You don't have to go that far." Praha turned towards the door and adjusted his tie. "We're leaving now. We'll be back within an hour. Lena clasped her hands tightly before her chest, her fingers trembling slightly from the force. Your Highness, we will wait for you here. Please be careful. Praha stopped, letting Lena tug on his sleeve, and gave a slight nod. Sarah was squatting in a corner, holding the ball of golden thread in both hands, her cheeks flushed. This is great. I got a rare item. I'm practically invincible now. Sephirus stood beside Praha and turned to look at Sarah. Sarah, I'm leaving too. Aren't you going to see me off? Sarah kept her back to them, continuing to fiddle with the thread in her hands, showing no intention of turning around. Sephirus stood frozen, his smile gradually fading. Pra took a step. Let's go. Sephirus followed behind, glancing back at her retreating figure. She's really changed. Mascarpone sat on the floor, hugging his knees tightly, his body trembling nonstop. So cold. Lena knelt on the other side, staring at the floor. I wonder if Mother and the capital are safe now. I'm so worried. Sarah looked at Mascarpone, seeing his dejected state, and actually found him a bit pitiful. Why get back to the real world? I'm definitely signing up for a self-defense class. In her mind, Sarah pictured herself sweating profusely, starting to practice swordsmanship again, maybe even learning karate. I have to build up my physical strength now. Sarah clenched her fist, her gaze becoming determined. Sarah rested her forehead in one hand, her brows furrowed. But the reality is, I really just want to go home. Lena and the woman beside her looked at each other and smiled. If only this were all just a dream. The woman beside her looked up at the window. How long has it been? It feels like more than an hour has passed. Sarah's eyes flew open, her mouth twitching. It hasn't even been 10 minutes. 10 minutes, Lena exclaimed, her face full of disbelief. Sarah was huddled between the two of them, the three of them squeezed together in a comical sight. Sarah's expression suddenly turned serious, her fingertip resting on her lower lip. Speaking of which, this garden. If you walk straight through, how long does it take to reach the teleportation portal? Lena tilted her head slightly. I heard it takes about 20 minutes. That's quite a long distance. Sarah pressed her fingertip to her lower lip, her gaze sharp. So His Highness and the others have to cross that huge garden, get through a pride of lions, and then make their way all the way back here. Lena lowered her gaze, looking a bit flustered. Yes. Sarah let out a sigh. Don't suddenly get that apologetic look on your face. At this rate, even if they call us dead weight, I won't be able to argue. The woman beside Sarah leaned closer, her eyes filled with amazement. But you really surprised me just now. I never thought you'd be able to take care of a corpse with your own hands. The earlier scene surfaced in Sarah's mind, raising the heavy wooden box high and slamming it down on the writhing body. The woman's eyes were slightly red, her voice trembling a little. In that moment, I thought you were going to attack Papuli. We could only stand by and watch, unable to help at all. She slowly lowered her head, avoiding Sarah's gaze. I'm sorry. I'm so useless. Sarah can defeat zombies. Lena has divine power. Mascarpone found the portal entrance. I'm the only one who can't do anything. Sarah looked into the other's eyes. Have you ever seen a moving corpse before? The woman shook her head. No, I haven't either. Sarah took the other's trembling hand. In a situation you've never experienced before, you can't expect yourself to be useful right away. Just not freaking out is already amazing. The other woman looked down at the hand holding hers, her fingers gently tugging at the corner of her clothes. You're so kind. Tears welled up in her eyes, and a relieved smile appeared on her lips. I never thought there would be a day I'd be comforted by Sarah. Consomme reached out and gently touched Sarah's palm with her fingertips. My name is Consomme. Sarah squeezed her hand back, a smile on her lips. Consomme, I've remembered it. I won't get it wrong this time. It's nice to meet you. My name is Sarah. Papuli squatted alone in the distance, arms crossed over his chest, letting out a disdainful snort. An hour and a half had passed. The scheduled time of return was long overdue, yet the expected footsteps were not heard. Praha and Sephirus still hadn't come back. Lena was curled up in a corner, looking at her companions. If we escape, what do you plan to do, Miss Sarah? Sarah raised her index finger, her tone light. Drink coffee. Lena scooted forward, a look of longing in her eyes. Me too. I want a freshly ground hot coffee with cream. Deborah had her back to them, the corners of her mouth lifting slightly. I'm an iced coffee person. The two of them hadn't returned yet, but no one showed their inner anxiety. Papuli gritted his teeth, his brow furrowed. Be quiet. What's so fun about chattering on and on? Sarah sat leaning against the wall, her eyes cold. Your voice is the loudest, you know? Papuli swung his arm fiercely. Use your brain and think. Are we just going to sit here and wait to die? Sarah was expressionless. Aren't you doing the exact same thing? You've got some nerve to talk. Papuli put his head in his hands, his fingers digging into his hair. There isn't a single person here who can use a sword. Aren't you worried? We might have been abandoned. Sarah shot the man a sidelong glance, her eyes filled with annoyance. It's strange that he'd give the magic thread to someone like me. His careless words are really infuriating. Sarah closed her eyes and let out a long sigh. Don't worry, it's fine. Those guys would never abandon us. Papuli's eyes widened. How can you be so sure? Sarah tilted her head slightly, her pupils flashing with a red light. Sarah looked at the young woman beside her. Because Lena is here. The girl they're interested in is right here. Of course they'll come back. Lena stood frozen, her pupils trembling slightly. Those men are the main characters of the story. If they abandoned the heroine, they wouldn't be qualified to be protagonists. Sarah raised her bandaged hand and wiped her lips. They will definitely come back. And they'll rescue Lena. Lena's eyes grew moist, and she whispered the other's name softly, Miss Sarah. But you like him so much too. Sarah's eyes widened. What nonsense are you talking about? They never liked me from the start. That's an unchangeable fact. Consommé covered her mouth, her eyes red, her shoulders trembling slightly. Miss Sarah. Sarah withdrew her gaze. I don't need pity. The promised time has already passed. Although I think those two will come back, we have to prepare for the worst. Sarah pushed herself up from the floor and straightened her messy hair. Compared to these mentally fragile people, the willpower I forge in society is more reliable. Sarah straightened her back, her gaze sharp. While I can't deny my lack of power, I will do my best. Lena touched her chest, her eyes showing worry. Shouldn't we go look for them? Maybe they need help. Mascarpone snorted. Without weapons? How would we look? Consommé hunched her shoulders. What if we get lost? Get lost. Is the garden that big? Sarah turned sideways and raised a hand to signal for calm. If we're going out, we have to wait until sunrise. First, we need to make sure we get through tonight safely. Lena looked confused. How do we prepare? Sarah tightened the golden thread on her fingers, the line glinting between them. It made a faint scraping sound. Sarah pulled the golden thread on her fingertips taut, a cold smile on her lips. Set a trap to keep those corpses from getting in. I observed how Praha did it. As long as you tie this thread to a protrusion like a pillar, it could be used as a trap. Sarah stared at the doorway. If we stretch the thread across both sides of the door, even if the corpses break in, they'll be tripped. If we're lucky, it might even cut off their heads. Lena shrank her neck, her eyes full of unease. But what if our companions fall into the trap? Sarah raised her hand, her fingertips brushing over the sharp thread. It's fine. I can adjust the thread's sharpness with my will. Sarah's fingertip suddenly twitched. She pulled back her hand and put her finger in her mouth. Got a splinter. Lena rushed over in a panic. Are you all right? Sarah shook her head gently. I'm fine. This spot is perfect. Let's tie the thread here. Sarah bent down and pulled the golden thread taut. At this height, any zombie will definitely be tripped. Sarah walked to the other side of the door. The other end can be tied over there. Mascarpone stepped forward. I'll help. Sarah looked surprised. You're going to help? Mascarpone turned his face away, his eyes showing his usual arrogance. It's not like I'm helping because I want to. Mascarpone pointed to a corner of the wall. There's a spot over there that looks like it'll hold. There's a nail. Should we tie it there too? Sarah raised her arm, her fingertips reaching for the high spot on the wall. The position is good, but my hand can't reach. Lena brought a wooden chair over to Sarah. Please use this chair. Sarah glanced down at the wooden chair, her mouth twitching. Lena, this chair is missing a leg. Are you trying to kill me? Lena shrieked and frantically pulled her hands back. I'm sorry. Papuli, sitting in the corner, grunted. Just use me as a stepping stool. Sarah shot him a cold, sidelong glance. If your spine breaks, can you heal yourself? Papuli gritted his teeth, his face dark. What a willful woman. Sarah turned and faced Papuli, who was off to the side. Why aren't you helping? Papuli spread his hands. Why should I help? Besides, if you're asking for help, you should have a better attitude. A mocking smile played on his lips. At times like this, you should rely on a man more. Sarah's eyes were icy. This guy, as long as they're taller than me, I don't care if they're a man or not. Sarah withdrew her gaze. There's no time to argue now. We have to solve this ourselves. She turned away and walked towards the wooden chair. Lena, can you help me hold the chair? Lena gripped the back of the chair with both hands. But Lady Sarah, we only have a broken chair. What if the three of us hold it together? Mascarpone squatted down and held one leg. That's right. Let's hold it steady together. Sarah placed a black-booted foot onto the wooden seat. Hold it steady. I'll go up on the count of 3. 3. Sarah leaped up abruptly, her skirt tracing an arc in the air. Lena let out a scream. Why didn't you say 1 and 2 first? Sarah lay flat on her back on the wooden floor. Lena and Mascarpone were sprawled beside her. Everyone was exhausted, breathing heavily. I'm so tired. Sarah turned her head, her eyes filled with exhaustion. She was terribly thirsty. She turned her neck with effort. Her gaze swept to the closed wooden door. The golden threads formed a large cross, sealing the entrance. Still no movement? Sarah stared at the door and responded in a low voice, yeah. Papuli crossed his arms, his eyes filled with disdain. That thing is completely useless. Sarah shot him a sidelong glance. What an asshole. All talk and no action. Sarah pushed herself up from the floor and straightened her messy hair. How long has it been? I am hungry, Papuli suddenly. Dot shouted. His stomach let out a loud rumble, breaking the dead silence. Sarah froze, exchanging a look with Mascarpone beside her. The air fell silent. Sarah closed her eyes, her brow furrowed. So what? Lena looked up abruptly, her expression horrified. Huh, is there no food left? Mascarpone, chewing on a large mouthful of bread, replied indistinctly, we ate it all just now. Sarah watched them. Good thing I had them eat first. If there were any left, that guy would have definitely snatched it. Sarah stood protectively in front of Lena. She stared coldly at Papuli. Why should Lena give you food? Papuli retorted self-righteously. It can't be helped. Bigger people consume more energy. Sarah let out a scoff, tapping her chin with her finger. Huh, and when did you ever consume any energy? A mocking smile played on her lips, her eyes filled with contempt. Are you referring to when you let out that pathetic scream earlier? Papuli gritted his teeth, a vein throbbing on his temple. I warned you. Watch your mouth. Sarah brushed a strand of hair with her fingertips, a mocking smile on her lips. And if I don't? She took a step forward, looking directly into his eyes. You're the one who needs to use their brain. If you don't change your attitude, I won't stay silent any longer. Papuli swung his arm violently, his palm slamming against the wall with a heavy thud. You little brat, Sarah shouted sharply. Stop. Sarah's pupils trembled as she watched the chaos unfold. Consomme had lifted a heavy wooden chair, her arms shaking violently from the effort. Tears streamed down her flushed face. Put your hand down. She roared hoarsely, staring intently at Papuli in front of her. Papuli dodged to the side, his eyes filled with disgust. Get out of the way, you deadweight. Consomme swung her arms fiercely. I'm not deadweight. Everyone is working hard with their own 2 hands. What have you done, Papuli? Besides mocking us, you've done nothing. You just don't dare to admit that you're the useless one. So you treat us like trash, is that it? Papuli stared at the wooden stool in front of him. Things that get in the way should sit down and stay quiet. Otherwise, I'll have to punish you. His leather shoes scuffed against the floor, making a faint sound. Papuli was curled up in a corner, hugging his knees tightly, staring down at his toes. Consomme did well. He really deserved that. Sarah held a piece of bread in each hand, raising them to her chest, a smile spreading across her face. All right, time to fill our stomachs. I've been keeping these warm for you. Lena, hiding in the back, let out a muffled sound. Papuli's head shot up, sweat beading on his forehead, his eyes full of disbelief. There's food? Sarah turned sideways, a smile in her eyes. Of course there is. Want some? Lena stood to the side, holding bread in both hands. Her expression was dazed. Papuli's Adam's apple bobbed, his gaze locked on the bread. Joe, Sarah took a bite of bread, her eyes cold. Based on your attitude just now, I don't feel like sharing any with you at all, putting on such high and mighty airs. Don't come crawling to us now. Lena nibbled on her food. Mascarpone stared at the bread in his hand. Beside him, Consomme was eating with her head down. The 3 of them were gathered together. Lena let out a soft laugh. Mascarpone chuckled behind his hand. Consomme laughed out loud along with them. Laughter echoed in the air. Consomme squinted. Oh dear, I just finished rubbing my feet and then used this hand to grab food. Lena tilted her head. Me too. My fingernails are full of dirt. Sarah raised her index finger, her expression serious. Only those with enough strength and can maintain so-called cleanliness and elegance. The winners now are the ones who survive, even if their hands are covered in mud. Let's just make it our little secret that we touched food with dirty hands. Lena gently wiggled her fingertips, her eyes hesitant. May I ask something, Miss Sarah? You used to admire Praha very much, didn't you? Sarah raised a hand to scratch the back of her head, her expression nonchalant. I did like him. Lena took half a step forward. Then why can you act so calm now? Sarah turned her head to the side, a faint light reflecting in her pupils. My feelings have just cooled. The me you knew is gone. Lena held her breath, her hands clenched tightly at her chest. I guess I'm a selfish person. I want someone who will put me first. Ah, Sarah raised her index finger, a smile playing on her lips. If I were to fall, he would be the first one to offer me a hand. Sarah's eyes shot wide open, her pupils contracting in terror. A hand grasped at the empty air before her eyes as she let out a short scream. Sephirus stood outside the door, his head bowed and eyelids lowered. His profile looked cold and distant. I'm back. Can you open the door? Sarah. Sephirus raised his right hand. A thin, transparent thread was wrapped around his fingertips. What is this? A spiderweb? So was a trap. Deborah crossed her arms, her gaze scrutinizing. If that's the case, why did you go to the trouble of tearing down the whole wall? You could have just knocked. Sephirus turned his head, a smile on his lips. I was going to knock, but His Highness Praha warned me not to touch that door under any circumstances. Why? Sephirus leaned closer to Praha, placing a hand on his shoulder. He said Sarah would definitely have set a trap. He knows Sarah so well. It's enough to make one jealous. Praha looked down at the ground, his pupils suddenly contracting. Your Highness, your leg. Lena lunged forward, her eyes filled with panic. Are you hurt? Praha leaned against the wall with one hand, a bead of sweat on his temple. Just a cramp. Don't worry. Lena's brow furrowed. Quick, let me see. Consomme raised a hand to wipe the tears from the corner of her eyes. As long as you're safe, that's all that matters. Mascarpone stood with his hands on his hips. What's the situation in the garden? Lena gasped. 100 of them. Praha swung his sword, cutting down the obstacles. The blade of light carved an arc through the air. Just cutting them down wasn't enough to get through. We considered retreating, but we have to pass through here to reach the main portal. Countless dark figures writhed at the end of the corridor, letting out low roars. Praha gripped his spear, flames igniting on its tip. We have no choice but to carve a bloody path for ourselves. As soon as he finished speaking, he swung the spear he was given and incinerated the pile of corpses. The glow of the fire painted the entire passage red. Sephirus supported Praha by the arm, a look of resignation in his eyes. Before I could stop him, he had already used up all the remaining flames. It was so reckless. Sephirus turned his head and gave Sarah a thumbs up behind his back, but the fire did take care of them. Your prediction was spot on. Sarah lowered her eyelids, her brow furrowed with worry. Is this really the time to be saying such things? Sarah turned her face to the side, her expression grave. So he used up all the power of the magic spear. A normal person would collapse after using it just once, and he used it all up by himself. Praha stood at the edge of the firelight, his chest heaving violently, gasping for breath. The scene was just like hell. Sarah's face instantly turned pale, cold sweat beading on her temple. The only escape route is on fire. You gotta be kidding me. Praha shoved the main doors open. Get out of here quickly, before the fire gets completely out of control. Sarah stared at the sea of fire in the distance. Did you get rid of all the corpses? No. Praha clenched his fist. About half of them are still wandering around nearby. Sarah, with her back to the others, had slightly trembling fingertips. So there are still about 50 left. If we run into them. Sephirus waved his hand, a cheerful smile on his face. Don't worry about that. Compared to the monsters, it's more likely we'll suffocate or be burned alive. The fire is spreading quickly with the wind. Praha pushed open the heavy wooden doors and turned sideways, gesturing for everyone to pass. Hurry up. Sarah froze, her eyes wide with terror. We're running through the burning garden? Before we suffocate. Deborah lifted her skirt, her expression becoming resolute. Sephirus and Darjeeling will lead the way. I'll be in the rear. When you hear Sephirus's signal, everyone must run together. Absolutely do not look back. And don't stop. Papuli gritted his teeth, his expression tense. Even if you hear something behind you, as long as you're still breathing, you keep running. Praha started walking, his leather boots stepping on the ground. Then let's go. Ahead, the flames soared into the sky. Drywood cracked in the inferno, emitting harsh crackling sounds as waves of heat rolled in. Sarah covered her mouth and nose with her hand, her pupils trembling violently. A sea of fire. Are we really going to go through here? She stopped abruptly, staring at the maze being consumed by flames ahead. Don't tell me. This garden is a hedge maze? Who on earth builds a maze in their own home? Deborah turned her head, a hint of resignation on her lips. That's right. It's my mother's hobby. She gave a thumbs up, her eyes filled with self-mockery. I heard mazes are good for brain development, you know? Oh no, I accidentally badmouthed Praha's mother. Sephirus pressed his index finger to Sarah's lips. His eyes were cold. Shoo! He whipped his head around. He let out a roar towards the sea of fire. Now, everyone started moving, their leather boots pounding on the stone ground, kicking up tiny sparks. They sprinted deep into the maze. Consomme gasped for air, her steps becoming messy. I can't run anymore. You guys go on ahead. Sarah grabbed her wrist, her eyes sharp. If you still have the energy to talk, then use it to run. She dragged Consomme along, sprinting at full speed. To the left, then turn right. Sarah suddenly shoved Consomme aside. Watch out. Consomme lost her balance and fell to the side, letting out a scream as she watched a flaming beam fall. Sarah's pupils contracted, reflecting the vast expanse of fire. The shadow of death was inches away. Praha leaped into the air, his leather boots landing heavily on the ground. He charged forward in the nick of time. He stretched out his arms and caught the falling Sarah, holding her protectively in his embrace as a deafening crash shattered the air. Char debris came crashing down. Sparks flew wildly in the air. Praha ducked down, his large hand cupping the back of Sarah's head, pressing her whole body into his chest. He shielded her from the rain of fire with his back. Sarah curled up against his chest, her fingertips gripping his collar tightly. The only sounds in her ears were the violent roaring and his steady heartbeat. Flames licked wildly all around them. The heat distorted their vision. Everything was dyed a glaring red. Survivor information.